Before I make my statement, I want to endorse what was said earlier about the death of Detective Garda Colm Horkin. The remarkable outpouring of grief we saw over the weekend says a lot about our values as a country and the respect that we have for the men and women who uphold our laws. Whenever we lose a member from Garda Síochána in the line of duty, it wounds us all and we grieve as a nation. At the funeral, Colm's brother Brendan remembered his achievements on the sporting pitch and said, and I quote, "He never let the jersey down." The exact same thing could be said about his career as a Garda. He never let the uniform down. He never let us down, the people he had sworn to serve. Our condolences go to his family and friends and the people of Charlestown and the members of An Garda Síochána. Ar yesterday Grebahan Dílis. On Friday last, in lieu of a regular June European Council meeting, I participated in a video conference of heads of state and government. The main focus of our discussion was the Commission's proposal for an EU-wide recovery instrument known as Next Generation EU and the EU's 7-year budget for 2021 to 2027, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, or MFF for short. As a package, these are policies to enable our economies and societies to recover from the unprecedented challenges of the crisis caused by COVID, as well as the drive to the digital and green transformation of our countries and continent. We also received a report from the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on the high-level conference with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which took place on the 15th of June. In addition, Chancellor Merkel provided an update on the implementation of the Minsk peace agreement and the situation in the Ukraine, and also the occupied territories in Crimea. The House may also be interested to know that on Thursday last, the 18th of June, I joined the video conference of the Eastern Partnership Summit, which brings EU leaders together with their counterparts from 6 countries to our east: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. The meeting underpinned the strategic importance of this relationship. In her wrap-up remarks later on, Minister McEntee will provide further detail on that summit and developments in eastern Ukraine. Friday's video conference opened with a presentation by the President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli MEP, who expressed the European Parliament's support for an ambitious recovery fund. We were also briefed by President of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, who provided us with an overview of the economic situation in the European Union. Her assessment was stark. The damage caused by the COVID crisis to the European economy has been considerable and will be lasting. Her assessment is that it will take until late 2022 for the European economy to recover to pre-crisis levels. She predicted that the worst effects on our labour markets may yet be to come and are likely to affect young people and those in the private sector disproportionately. At our last meeting in person in February, the European Council was unable to reach a consensus on the proposal for the MFF then on the table. At that time, the enormous consequences of COVID-19 for Europe were not yet known. However, in the months that have followed, the scale of the challenge we're facing collectively has become more apparent. So on the 23rd of April, we agreed to task the European Commission to develop a proposal for an ambitious recovery fund equal to the scale of the challenge, as well as a revised proposal for the MFF. Following that request, on the 27th of May, the European Commission published a package for economic regeneration. This included a revised proposal for the European Recovery Instrument, to be called Next Generation EU, to run from the period of 2021 to 2024, and a revised proposal for the MFF. The total package is €1.85 trillion in 2018 prices and 1.1 trillion, that's broken down rather as 1.1 trillion for the MFF and 750 billion for Next Generation EU. The Commission proposed that the recovery instrument be funded through one-off borrowing on the financial markets on behalf of the Commission as an exceptional measure to the unprecedented circumstances we now face. This will be achieved by temporarily lifting the own resources ceiling to 2% of EU gross GNI. The additional funding would then be challenged through the EU programmes and repaid over a long period of time, starting in 2028 and running through to 2058. Our discussion on Friday was the first opportunity for leaders to exchange views on these very substantial proposals. I'd already set out my views in a telephone conversation with European Council President Charles Michel earlier in the week. On both occasions, I emphasised that we welcomed the broad thrust of proposals and the government's support for an EU response that demonstrates solidarity with those regions and sectors most affected by the pandemic. I also emphasised the scale and the impact that the crisis has had on Ireland, on our economy and employment levels, and the need for this to be properly reflected in the assessment of needs and the related allocation key for any new funds. In my view, this is the metric against which grants and loans should be allocated, the extent to which a country has been impacted by COVID, not its past economic performance or its ability to bounce back from a crisis. On the MFF, I reiterated that we are open to contributing more to the new budget, but only if this protects our vital interests as a country, especially the Common Agricultural Policy. The issues which were important for Ireland before the crisis, CAP, cohesion, climate, the single market, research and innovation, are even more important now as the country seeks to recover from an unprecedented and sudden shock to the system. We must also use this opportunity to set Europe on the right path for the future, building a greener, fairer, more resilient, digital and sustainable union. As everyone in the House will agree, CAP is an important, long-standing and well-functioning policy and a vital support to our rural communities, rural economy and farm families. Wider than that, for decades, it has assured all Europeans of a secure and affordable food supply, something we should not take for granted and something not taken for granted in other parts of the world. Despite the increased allocation for rural development under the recovery proposal and the increased allocation in the CAP in the revised MFF, I said that what was now on the table was not acceptable to Ireland and does not yet meet the test of ensuring adequate funding into the future. Our farmers are experiencing considerable difficulties with exports and prices collapsing as a result of COVID, global disruption to trade routes, Brexit, and increased competition from third countries. As we increasingly talk about Europe's resilience, we need to underpin a strong agri-food sector, providing Europe with food security and helping us to achieve our climate goals as well. A strong and properly funded CAP is needed to achieve this, and we can settle for nothing less. I also said that Brexit will affect Ireland disproportionately, so whatever the outcome is of the ongoing negotiations, we will be affected more than other countries are. So any recovery instrument should also be designed to respond to that as well. It is now apparent that at the end of the year, the United Kingdom will leave the period of transition now in place and begin to trade with the European Union as a third country. While I very much hope that this will be on the basis of a comprehensive free trade agreement, it will still mean a disimprovement in trading conditions for Irish exporters. Were the UK to leave the European Union, or rather were the UK to leave the transition without a trade deal in place, the consequences will be especially severe for Ireland, which is the most exposed member state. From last week's discussion, I believe that leaders are committed to reaching an agreement, ideally next month, but significant differences exist and it will not be an easy task to find consensus. There are some areas of convergence. We agree that there should be an exceptional response at EU level to the COVID crisis, that this should be financed through the European Commission's borrowings, that funding should be temporary and targeted at the sectors and regions most affected, and that the MFF should contribute to the reform and transformation of our economies and societies. Thinking is not yet aligned, however, on the following issues. One, whether the recovery package should provide only for loans or whether it should be a mix of grants and loans. Whether it should deal only with the direct impact of COVID-19 or also pre-existing disadvantages and imbalances. Whether conditions should attach to the fund. If so, which ones? How much should the fund be? And how quickly should loans be repaid? These will not be issues easily resolved in July. Nonetheless, we all expressed a willingness to work together in an intensified way to reach a conclusion at a meeting in person next month. In the coming weeks, President Michel will engage in consultations with all Member States before tabling a revised proposal ahead of the meeting in mid-July. While the primary focus of the meeting was the MFF and the Next Generation EU, Presidents von der Leyen and Michel provided a readout of the high-level conference on Brexit that took place with Prime Minister Johnson on the 15th of June. At the high-level conference, they took stock of the limited progress made to date in future partnership negotiations, and in a joint statement afterwards, both sides agreed to intensify negotiations with a view to building new momentum. Both sides also confirmed their commitment to the full and timely implementation of the withdrawal agreement, including the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. I thank Presidents von der Leyen and Michel, and also the Union's negotiator Michel Barnier and his team, for their continued skill and measured handling of these negotiations. I believe that a deal with the UK is still possible, and express my hope that intensified engagement over the summer will reveal the landing zone for an agreement. I was among several leaders to acknowledge the importance of early and comprehensive contingency planning, given the possibility of no trade deal on the future relationship being reached. Any deal will entail significant disruption to our supply chains, business models, market access, and also to the cost of doing business with the UK, and we need to be wise to that. It will also impact on our fishermen and seafood industry. The arrangements that we have now can't possibly be this good in the future. I also took the opportunity to thank the leaders for their friendship and solidarity with me as Taoiseach and Ireland as a country over the past 3 years, in particular when it came to Brexit, and I wish them well in the difficult and challenging days ahead. Thank you.